Sha la 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 means I love the Stick to Wrestling podcast. Yep, I want to thank my friends in the Delphonics for writing that song about their favorite podcast, Stick to Wrestling. Give us 60 minutes, and perhaps indeed we will give you a raw bone podcast. And sure, there are some good wrestling podcasts out there, but are they wicked good?
Oh, hell no!
I think that settles that issue. And with that, I would like to bring on our convivial co-host, Mr. Sean Goodwin. Sean, how are you doing this week?
Have we been sued by Newbury Comics yet?
Not yet, but you never know.
One of these days, no. So with me, it's the Facebook, because we have an equally great Facebook page with now, I believe we're approaching 750 fine folks who are all really friendly. And if you weren't around this week, you missed who did Bob Backlund beat 40 years ago, if you need to know. Were Vern and Dick Gafflis ever young? Did Dusty and Manny resolve the unemployed Uncle Fat Friend dispute? And what the hell is Sonny Myers doing to Iron Mike DiBiase? All these questions, magazines. We have a discussion right now about who is the biggest draw of, who is the biggest draw in the most different arenas around the world. So stuff like that. Just, why wouldn't you want to do this? It makes no sense.
No, it's totally free, and it's an extension of the Stick to Wrestling podcast. So if you like this, you're going to like that. And hey, follow me on Twitter. It's John McAdam. Just put in my name, and you see two guys fighting with chairs, and become a follower on my march to 1 million Twitter followers. And speaking of which, the Dusty and Manny thing came from the best Twitter follow besides me out there is this thing, Super 70s Sports. If you're into like 70s and 80s nostalgia sports, definitely follow this guy. If you go to our webpage, he's a big old school wrestling fan too. And if you go to our Facebook page, you will see the thing he did with Dusty Rhodes and Manny Fernandez, an incredibly funny caption. But anyway, we are going to now go to part 2 of our discussion with Mr. Chris Tabar. It was a really good show. Clash of the Champions 10, which took place now over 30 years ago, if you want to feel really old. And let's go to that right now. Road Warriors versus Skyscrapers. My first question, and Tabe, I will ask you this. Why are the Road Warriors dismantling cars in a junkyard video?
Because they'd already eaten raw chicken in an AWA video, and this is the only place they could go with them. I guess. I don't know. Yeah, it's exactly like the doctor, that thing. It makes absolutely no sense. It doesn't help them. It just makes them look stupid, which they're the Road Warriors. Just all they have to do is walk out on your TV screen, and boom, that's all you need. Why have them do anything else?
Sean, what are your thoughts?
They feel tired here. I don't know. They don't feel like the guys from like 2 or 3 years earlier. There's just some kind of there's an intensity lacking. That
the problem is they're tired, but they're no longer the big guys. The Skyscrapers are a lot bigger and look a lot tougher. That
kills them.
And now all of a sudden they're just the Road Warriors, and they start out the match selling. They have no aura. They're done. They're just over as being the badasses of the 80s that they were. It's like a changing of the guard.
And I'm guessing the bookers thought that too, because they did not get treated nicely here.
No, they did not.
Well, at this point, I think if you're going to have the Road Warriors in any kind of a serious feud, and they meaning the promotion, had been salivating over a Road Warriors versus Skyscrapers feud. Finally, we're going to get these two huge guys against the Road Warriors, and it's going to be a moneymaker. And in order for that to make money, the Road Warriors have to at least look like there's a chance that they might lose. Sean, what do you think?
I guess, but I just think they're cannon fodder at this point. I mean, what use are the Road Warriors if you're using them like this?
And here's the thing. They had been on WTBS since 1983. They took like a year break, but, they came back in early 86, and they've been on since. And any act starts to get stale at some point, and I'll read right from my notes. Right around this time, Roadies to WWF talk started. Their contracts were ending, I want to say May or June. And I mean, I think at this point, they kind of made it known that they were looking to make the jump.
Well, that wasn't. It was about 6 months earlier when they got killed in Marietta in the cage in the Marietta massacre. So they'd already been kind of made to look weak, and now they go in with guys that are a lot bigger than them. This is almost setting up like making the Skyscrapers the big deal rather than the Road Warriors. Didn't they say during the match that they were going to be wrestling on the pay-per-view 2 weeks later anyway? Why even put this on the Clash? Because now you're either giving away the match or you're going to end up with an inconclusive mess, which is what we got.
Yeah, well, I think anyone knows this was going to end in an inconclusive mess, and it certainly did. I mean, the referee just, they were going for the finish, and the referee just like went away. He didn't even like take a bump, wasn't distracted. He just like walked away from it. It was crazy.
Give Spivey credit though; he took the Doomsday device.
Yeah.
A big guy like that, give him credit for taking that bump.
Big guy who already had bad knees and a bad hip. I mean, Spivey, I always thought Spivey could have been a bigger deal in this business, but he, it just didn't work out for him. By the time he was ready to get pushed, he was physically spent.
He ended up going over to Japan and having some good matches in All Japan, though.
Yes, he did. I mean, I've heard about that. Like I said, his knees were already gone, his hip was already gone, and he was still out there performing at a high level. But one thing I wanted to share, when it finally became official that Sid was out of the Skyscrapers, they felt like they couldn't wait for him to come back, and he didn't come back until like May. And they brought in Mark Calloway. And the first time I saw Mark Calloway, I'm like, oh my God, this guy, he's too skinny. He's not muscular enough. And by the time this match rolled around, oh yes, he was. And it's the wrestling business. You do what you need to do.
How long did he last on this team?
Let me think. Spivey got hurt before the May pay-per-view, or maybe it was even the next pay-per-view. Spivey was hurt. They brought in some masked guy as a Skyscraper, and then they just dropped the team. It was something that they were planning on, like the Skyscrapers were going to be a huge deal, and it never really made money. It just puttered out at the end.
The reason I ask is it wasn't that long after this that he became The Undertaker.
When did he become The Undertaker? 1991?
Yeah, it was 91. Yeah. So another year.
Okay, yeah, and he got a singles push after the Skyscrapers, and he had on pay-per-view a big U.S. title match against Lex Luger, but it was almost like, surprise, WCW did not know what to do with this guy who's legit 6'8", and has that look, but the WWF knew what to do with him.
He debuted as Kane the Undertaker. I did not know that was his original name. Kane the Undertaker on November 19th, 1990. So you're basically looking at 10 months.
Okay, wow. And that's right. Now I remember he went to Memphis and did a match against Lawler, and he made sure that, he did not do a job for Lawler. He didn't want to be part of that videotape that Lawler would put out of him, pinning Harley Race and pinning whoever.
Everybody.
Yeah, and he
took out Mil Mascaras.
Yeah, well, that didn't make it to videotape, unfortunately. But yeah, he made it a point, like he's not, doing a 1, 2, 3. And looking back, that was probably not the worst idea.
Oh.
And so it was 1990, and the more I rewind this, yes, by 91 he was a babyface. But anyway, so Steiners versus Doom. It's wrestling. We get used to dumb names. Doom is a dumb name for a tag team, and Woman is a dumb name for a valet.
That's the least of my concerns with this. You have a tag team with 2 African Americans. When you start this tag team, there are 3 African Americans on the roster, and neither one of those guys is Ranger Ross. So it really shouldn't take a brain surgeon to figure out who the 2 guys are. And this went on for the entire time they were together.
Well, Jim Ross says during this match that it's their identities are the worst kept secret in wrestling. No kidding, Jim. You gave away their names in their debut match. You said who they were. Come on.
But you might, because I remember Lance Russell doing stuff like this. If it was like ridiculous and Lance wouldn't go along, he goes, "Oh, obviously we know who this is." And I mean, Jim's just protecting his reputation here because it's obvious who these 2 guys are. It was just pointless to have masks on them. Why did they bother with the masks?
I have no idea, but I mean, I've said this on the show before, and I apologize for repeating. I was at Halloween Havoc '89 when Doom debuted. We did not see them on TV. We did not see photographs of them. We had no idea who Doom was. And when they came out, the little kid in front of me started screaming Butch Reed and Ron Simmons. I mean, it was that. And they weren't even in the ring yet. They were like 200 feet away, and the kid's like, Butch Reed and Ron Simmons. This kid had to be 8 years old. and right away he figured it out. But what did we think of this match, Chris?
It was all right. Nothing real special. It felt like I don't know, like they just didn't quite mesh, but it did what it's supposed to do. I hate when they do mask versus something matches and then the one team sits there and tries to take the masks off anyway. I always hated that. Just win the match. You're gonna take them off for you. Just win the match.
I thought Rick Steiner pulling the mask off of Butch Reed, I thought it was funny. I don't know why. I just think, and Butch Reed with that shocked over the top look. Oh no, now people know who I am. It was, Three Stooges pie in the face, but I thought it was funny. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, and as he's sitting there explaining to Ron, apologizing for losing his masks, he gets pinned. So now Ron has to lose his mask too. Good job. Well done by everybody.
That part I did like. I thought it was funny the way he ripped it off. Earlier in the match, in general, I don't like that, but the pulling it off by surprise and then he's all shocked and at least the pin. I thought that was pretty good. Yeah.
Rick Steiner putting the mask on was absolutely hilarious. I forgot he did that, and I was laughing out loud when I saw that again for the first time yesterday.
Now,
Go ahead.
Oh,
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
No,
I was just gonna say, as far as the match goes, I agree. It was fine. They've had better.
I was just going to throw in, because I don't know how often I'm going to be on this show, but I just want to throw in, hey, those guys were invited to my wedding, but they were not able to come because they were in Japan. So their dad was at my wedding instead. He was the Steiners actually family friends of my wife's family. Their dad is a super nice guy, Frank. He passed away several years ago, but he was at our wedding. Steiner's brothers were supposed to be there, but couldn't. So just wanted to throw that in.
Oh, wow. Your family is friendly with the Rex Steiner family.
Yeah, my wife's family, not mine. But yeah, because Rex Steiners are from Bay City. That's where Michigan, which is where my wife is from. So, and my father-in-law was a sports reporter, and so he knew the Rex Steiners through that, and Frank and he became friends and stuff.
I'm trying to figure out a Bay City roller joke, but I can't because I'm not a funny person.
They're named after Bay City, Texas.
Really? I thought it was Michigan. I thought they threw a dart at the map or something.
They did, but it's actually, I think it's Texas, but it's not Bay City, Michigan.
Oh, that's such a disappointment.
But Bay City, Michigan claims it anyway.
I claim it. Anyway, bad 70s references from your podcasters. All right, now, Gordon Solie interviews the Four Horsemen. I'm going to get your thoughts on this interview, but one thing, Arn Anderson remained silent this entire night. And he's one of the best talkers out there. Then again, so's Olli. Then again, so's Rick. But what did you think of that interview?
I don't have any notes written down. I honestly cannot remember it. So maybe that's what I remember, that it's completely forgettable. But I honestly don't remember the interview. Refresh my memory.
Well, Olli basically took over the whole thing and said that Sting, he has until the end of the program to come out and say that he's not going to wrestle Ric Flair on the pay-per-view in 2 weeks. Otherwise, they're going to break into his dressing room and get him. It wasn't Oli's best interview, to say the least. Sean, what did you think?
It's coming back to me now, but I'm with Chris. I'm like, what interview? What interview? I didn't remember it, and it was unnecessary. They already made the exact same point before, and then you just got out to say it again. There was no point to it at all.
You know what? I thought there was, because they said it 2 hours ago, and I think they needed to hammer that point home. That
really?
Sting, you're no longer a horseman, and you've got X amount of time until the end of the program to come out here and back out of that title match, which everyone knows Sting's not going to do.
Yeah, Jim Cornette mentioned it 400 times every 2 seconds. Why do we need to have another interview the same thing? Yeah, exactly. Sean's right. There's no need to have it again.
I think it's the guys who are saying it. That Jim Cornette saying it is one thing, the Horseman saying it is another, and so now we go to the ring. It's Olli Anderson taking Sting's place in the main event. It is now Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Olli Anderson against Buzz Sawyer, Great Muta, and Dragon Master. And boy, the crowd, like you guys said earlier, the crowd doesn't know what to do with it. Tabe, what are your thoughts?
Again, I can't get over Dragon Master even being there. He wasn't even a mid-level star. He just thrown in. I know that was part of the faction. He's just out of place. Pretty decent match though. I thought they did a pretty good job with the match. And then it's like the Buzz Sawyer show. He's getting slammed into the cage. He's jumping off the cage. He's the one carrying the show.
I agree. Buzz Sawyer looked like a guy who, he had basically been AWOL from the top of the business since like 83, 84 when he got fired from Georgia. And he looked like a guy, he's not a main eventer in a big company like WCW, but he looked like a guy that they could do something with. Sean, do you agree with that?
Absolutely. TV title, maybe. I mean, he was like Bugs Bunny in that baseball cartoon. You know, Bugs Bunny at first base. Bugs Bunny said, I felt like Buzz was like putting himself into slams. He was everywhere. And the other problem with this match is the fact that half of it wasn't on tape. Half the match, you're looking at either Flair yelling at Sting or Sting yelling at Flair or Sting injuring himself.
Yeah, I mean, by the time when they shot that angle, they really took any meaning away from the match itself, certainly any meaning away from the ongoing feud between the Horsemen and what was formerly J-Tex with Gary Hart. And I guess Gary Hart had already like gone home. One thing I noticed, it's in my notes here, it was a nice touch that they made it obvious during the match interviews that they had been done before the show, and that since those interviews took place, the world had turned upside down. Like Ric Flair was doing his interview totally as a babyface, and it just looked like what went on was not planned. I mean, any thoughts on that, Tabe?
Yeah, I hadn't really noticed that, but you're right. You're right. That's like the one good bit of planning that they did. And then, yeah, I thought so. That's good. Maybe a little bit of forward thinking on their part. Yeah, good point.
And Sean, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, it probably went out that way because it had to go. They had no time left, so the wrestlers had to do it themselves. So hey, look at that! You let the wrestlers do their job, and it comes out perfectly.
I mean, and for me, and I think the rest of the crowd, we all just kind of sat there looking at the wrestlers doing their spots, waiting for Sting to come out. And obviously, Sting comes out and he starts barking at Flair. And we get the guys holding Sting back from going after the Four Horsemen. And then Rick is barking at Sting. One thing, so then Sting tries to climb the cage. And I mean, just the worst case scenario for WCW. This is an absolute nightmare. 2 hours after they shoot this angle that their whole business is going to be based on, Sting blows out his ACL climbing or trying to climb down from the cage. Tabe, you told us earlier that you tore your ACL. I mean, what's that like?
Well, it hurts like you can't even imagine. When I did it, like I shredded mine, and yeah, it's unbelievably painful. What's funny about that though is that once that initial shock wears off, you can walk around as long as you're not trying to do athletic stuff. You can walk around. So that's why Sting was able to be on his feet, and he's limping a little bit. It hurts, but that goes away, and you are still able to walk around. You can live with it. I lived with mine for a year before I finally had it fixed. So it is possible, but yeah, the pain is just absolutely unbelievable. It hurts just off the charts.
Yeah, and Sting is in the middle of an angle, and he does this. And I mean, someone asked, was Ric Flair aware of, Sting being injured? Clearly he wasn't, because Flair went right after him. And by the way, I thought that was crazy. Like, the match ends, Flair gets out of the cage, and he charges Sting. When Sting is being, he charges through a crowd of people to go after Sting. That is not a very heelish thing to do. If you're a heel, you back away.
Yeah, but it went into the theme of him being so upset at Sting for challenging him for the title.
Yeah.
And you're not going to fly with having Ric Flair solely a cowardly heel at this point. Crowd's not going to buy it.
One thing about the whole angle I wanted to touch on, I kind of got where Olli's character was coming from, because the whole point of being in the Four Horsemen was that you're protecting Ric Flair. Other horsemen don't challenge Ric Flair for the world's heavyweight title. And in a way, Sting should have known that. Chris, what do you think?
So I remember reading somewhere that the best heels are the ones that believe what they're saying is true and correct, or that they feel like they're justified. That's a perfect example here. You're exactly right. Olli is completely justified. Sting knows the rules when he gets in the group, and then he breaks the rules. He already kind of broke the rules by wrestling Flair at Starrcade, wins the Iron Man thing, and now he's got the title match. That's just a no-no. You're not supposed to do that if you're a horseman. Olli is completely right and justified to say, no, you got to give up the match or you're going to have to go.
Yeah, and you can see Sting's side of it too. Like, no, I'm not just going to give up my aspirations of being world's heavyweight champion just because I'm friends with Ric Flair, because I'm part of the Four Horsemen. But the other side of it is, like you just said, that's where Olli's coming from. That's the old school horseman mentality. Sean, give us your thoughts.
That's why that Olli promo was important, the first one, and that's why Rick couldn't do it. It had to be Olli because Rick was too mad, and you had to let Olli explain. You had to have that. Just by the way, Chris, that was Terry Funk told that to Mick Foley early in his career about the thing about being a heel, that you have to believe it yourself.
Gotcha.
But yeah, you needed to sell to legitimize why they were doing this, and that's why that Olli promo, and that's why he had to do it, because the other guys were the guys who were going to be the enforcers.
By the way, Michael Hayes got that from Louis Tillett back in like 77, 78. So it's been part of the business that the heel has to believe every word he's saying.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, okay, so we have this absolute disaster now. Sting, who we're building the company around. Ric Flair should never have been turned heel, in my opinion. However, Rick was the booker and he campaigned for it. He felt like the one guy who could get Sting over as a superstar was Ric Flair, and Rick was going to elevate Sting to that level. Sean, any thoughts on what I just said?
No, Rick, at this point, was you were not going to get that hatred. I think Rick's last shot at that was in '85 when he did that. And look what they had to do to get that. They had to have everybody in the world jump in the ring and break Dusty's leg.
Yeah.
The Carolina fans and these fans in Virginia and stuff like, they don't want to boo the guy.
No, they don't. They had turned Ric Flair babyface back in May of 1989, and here we are barely 6 months later, and they're turning him again. Not only did that company, no matter who owned it, did they do too many turns always, but now you're putting Ric Flair in a position where he's not at his best, where he's not in his best role. Tabe, what do you think?
I agree. At this point, it's like the Road Warriors. You can't make them heels. Nobody wants to boo them. They're way too cool. Flair is just way too awesome, way too much personality to be able to boo the guy. Even in '85, he was a heel in the Carolinas, but he was a face on TBS or the other way around, because he was feuding with Nikita Koloff. Same thing. People just did not want to boo Ric Flair. And how can you? The guy you look at the guy and you're like, yeah, that dude's awesome. I want to cheer that guy.
Yeah, I completely agree.
The bigger issue is that you're exposing Sting possibly, because if you have a feud with Rick and the fans won't boo Rick, well, they got to boo somebody.
Yep. And many a wrestler, I mean, the same thing happened to Lex Luger, that, the fans didn't get as into Luger in '88 as they should have, because he's against Ric Flair and no one's going to boo Flair. Like, I get where Rick was coming from. I really do. Like, look, I'm the guy. If Sting beats me for the world title, he's your Hulk Hogan for the next 10 years. I get that. But at the same time, there are different roads you could go down, and I would have gone down a different road. There's no way I would have let Rick turn heel. And plus, I'm giving Rick credit for being unselfish, wanting to get Sting over. However, there's also no question in my mind, Rick just likes being a heel.
Oh, yeah, it's his default setting.
It's easier.
It is easier. It's easier to get people to not like you than it is to get people to like you. And here's Rick, where everyone likes him, and he still insists on playing this role. Okay, now, post-match, of course, this was life in 1990. The show ends at 10:30. At 10:31, the phone rings. Someone wants to know what I thought of the show. I'll start with you, Tabe. What did you think of the show overall?
It's just not as good as a Clash should be. I know that after the first 4 or 5, the Clash just kind of dropped off, although Clash 6 was really good because it had Flair and Steamboat. But this is just, there's nothing really stand out on this show. You got the one big main event match, like the Road Warriors and the Skyscrapers, that ends up being nothing. The main event cage match is, the one side doesn't even belong there. It's just kind of a mediocre show. It's obviously just there for the angle. Overall, I had told you before that I didn't watch the show originally. I hadn't watched the show before. I actually had. When I watched it, I remembered it. So the second time watching it, I was kind of unimpressed, same as the first time. Just not that great.
Sean, what are your thoughts?
Chris nailed it. They scrapped together a show for the sole purpose of putting together one angle, and the wrestling gods frowned upon them and had the angle get all messed up because of a dumb screw-up of theirs. So they turned the show, which could have been something, into a throwaway show. You want to see the important part of the show? Go watch the interview with Rick and Sting and the Horsemen, Sting and Terry. That's it. There's really nothing else worthwhile.
Yeah, it felt like, okay, A, we have to fill up 2.5 hours, and B, this Clash of the Champions, its sole purpose was to build up the pay-per-view. It wasn't a standalone show. it was entertaining enough, but at the end of the day, I have to give it a slight thumbs down.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Why wasn't Luger wrestling? Put him in with Doc and have a double DQ or something like that instead of the Samoan Savage, and then at least you have a halfway decent singles match on the card.
You know what, though? They were doing Doc and Luger on the pay-per-view, so I thought having
Oh,
Doc
that's
and
right.
Luger
Yeah. Yep.
and
Right.
put him as the number one contender for the U.S. title, and then having Luger do an interview, even though the interview totally went sideways. I thought that was a decent plan coming in. All right, so I'm going to put both of you guys on the spot as we wrap this baby up. Tabe, you are the booker, and it is 10 minutes after this show, and you learned that Sting has blown out his ACL. What do you do?
Luger goes over clean at Wrestle War because he should have won the title in '88. And so now what you've done, you've put Luger over. You wait for the 6 months for Sting to come back. Give him time to recover so he's not coming back in just 5 months or whatever it ended up being. Give him time to recover. And now Sting and Luger, they're the former friends. And you say, hey, you took my title shot. That's my title. Let's go. Now you've got a whole nother main event feud.
Okay, so you would have turned Lex Luger babyface?
No, leave him heel and let Flair just be the heel again. It's like, guys, I realize that you hated me for going after Sting. I hope you understand where I'm at. But, it kind of just go back to being a baby face or just being a tweener or have it, let it be heel versus heel. Neither one of those guys has to be a pure baby face. Don't turn Luger baby face there. Heck, let him cheat to win the title if you want. Keep him as a heel.
Okay. Sean, you're the booker. You take over 10 minutes after this match. What do you do?
Basically, I would have you got to turn Flair back face. Have him be like that early '85 kind of tweener that he's a babyface against Koloff, and he could do that. I mean, you can have him as a babyface against Luger because everyone hates Luger anyway. And then when Sting comes back, flip him back, and you can have him. Well, hopefully everyone forgets, and we can forget the whole thing happened. But yeah, the key this is you have a hot Luger, and the only person you can get Luger over with as a babyface on the roster right now is Flair. So that's your only. I don't really see many other options. I mean, I guess you could call Ricky back.
That would be a tough one.
Yeah,
I would do one of two things. Number one, first of all, I would not have turned Luger back babyface under any circumstances. Plan B, what I would have done was to have had Scott Steiner wrestle Lex Luger on TV. Winner is the number one contender, and Scott Steiner pulls off the upset. The pay-per-view in 2 weeks is Ric Flair versus Scott Steiner. Oh, and while we're at it, Rick Steiner against Lex Luger. Option B, and this is, really my option A, what I would have done. The next Saturday on TV, we go into Sting's hospital room with a camera, and sitting with Sting is Ric Flair. And Ric Flair just says, look, Olli went off on his own. I had no idea he was going to do that. Yeah, we talked about it, but we never said, hey, I'm going after Sting. Yeah, I started swinging at Sting because the bullets were flying and I didn't know what to do. Sting, brother, I'm sorry. And, I'm going to help you rehab. And when we get back together, we'll go after the Andersons. And then you have the Andersons go on TV and completely flip out over Rick doing what he did. And the main event for, I think it was Wrestle War, would have been Ric Flair versus Arn Anderson with Olli Anderson in the corner. The reason that they turned Luger, was they were constantly in panic mode. Every pay-per-view, either it gets a huge buy rate, it's a huge success, or we're cleaning house. So, the poor bookers are going pay-per-view to pay-per-view. They're not looking long-term. And I don't think they should have done that. I think they should have said, look, long-term, we need Rick as a baby face. We need Lex as a heel. Here's how we get back on that track. And you can have the Andersons as heels, no problem.
I like that idea. Steiner is a main event guy in 1990 I don't like, but the Flair and Sting, if Flair does it right, yeah, he could say, hey, I lost my head. I'm sorry I slapped you around. Please forgive me. I'm really sorry. Let's go get the Andersons. I like that idea. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and by the way, never show that interview where he turns again because you're going completely against what actually happened. But I mean, it's what I would have done. But anyway, yeah, and long term, your guy is Sting, and I would have had Lex Luger at some point beat Ric Flair for the title. Sting then beats Lex Luger for the title, and then we have Ric Flair versus Sting in a babyface versus babyface match where Sting wins and he is coronated as the new top guy in WCW.
There you go. I like that.
All right.
Was this the start of the meme of everybody turns on Sting, or was that already in effect?
Well, everyone turned on Dusty, and Dusty was the lead babyface, and Sting was going to be the lead babyface. So, I mean, that's just like a common wrestling thing that, yeah, we're going to see everyone turn on Sting.
This is the start of Sting being the dumbest guy in the history of the world.
Well, that's what I'm going with.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
He was the only one who got shocked by this.
Exactly. Like, he's surprised that the Horsemen are mad at him for not giving up the title match? No.
Good point. Good point. I mean, looking at the history of the Horsemen, but hey, this is a really good show. And Tape, thank you for coming on. Chris Tabar, everybody.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we were able to make it work out this time. Hopefully get a chance to do it again sometime.
I thought that was a really good conversation with Chris Tabar. He was an excellent guest, and he will be back on the show soon. I liked what we did last week. We just had the conversation go organically. We talked about everything we needed to talk about. It took like 90 minutes. So we broke the show up into, 60 minutes of that talk this week, about 30 minutes of it this week. I think it was more like 35. But Sean, when we were having that conversation, I got done, we were on the phone for, a little over an hour and a half. And I go look at my Twitter, and I know by now this is going to be kind of old news. I go to my Twitter, and I see the incredible report that Kobe Bryant had died.
One of those once-in-a-generation things that just more, not only because of the magnitude of the person, and it's such because he'd finally kind of gotten his reputation back recently, since he retired. He was a family man with his daughter, and I just even thinking about it's horrible. But it's just the shock of it. It's like the John Lennon moment for another generation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, let's face it. Sean and I were out here, Metro Boston. We're Celtics fans. We're not going to like the Lakers, but I never could really bring myself to hate the Kobe and Shaq Lakers as much as I did the Magic and Kareem Lakers.
There's always a level of respect for certain, I always had that with James Worthy as well. When Kobe, I'll give him credit right here. When he got his 80 points, that was all pretty much a competitive basketball game. Okay, yeah. That was not 50 points getting patted on at the end like other people, That was a legit competition that those 81 points happened in. So that's even more of a credit to him to do that.
It really was. People will say things like, what do you care? You didn't know Kobe Bryant. Thousands, tens of thousands of people died today, yesterday, whatever. But those people, I'm sorry to say it, those people never brought joy into my life the way Kobe Bryant did.
You knew Kobe Bryant better than you knew the other 10,000.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, I didn't know him, but, he...
You knew him.
Yeah, exactly. You know exactly what I'm saying. So
sure,
anyway.
It's part of your life for 20 years. You have no choice. It's like many of these wrestlers were in territory days.
Precisely. The
like
guy
that?
was part of all. I mean, if you're a basketball fan at all, he was part of your life. But anyway, this show is going to come out February 2nd, 2020, and we're going to talk about some of the things that historical events that happened that week. And I would like to start with February 11th, 1984. Tito Santana moseys on into the Boston Garden and beats the Magnificent Morocco for the Intercontinental title. It is the biggest upset for me watching wrestling, the biggest upset result I have ever seen at a live event. I don't even know what would come in second place. We were stunned, especially since the titles never changed hands in Boston. But I just didn't see Tito Santana at that level, and I was half thinking I was going to go home and it would just all be forgotten and Morocco would be on TV the next week, still with the belt. But no, obviously that's not what happened.
I have made the statement. By the way, I was at this event. I wasn't at the second one we're going to talk about, but I was at this one. I was 9 years old and still my favorite wrestling moment ever. I have sung Don Morocco's praises for many, many a year, but at this point, Don was really I think the presence of Hogan was starting to get him frustrated. And he wasn't the same guy that he was earlier on, because I think he starts to see where his role's going, and it's not in the right direction. I love Tito at this point. Tito is my guy. And this was the start of where we we've disagreed about this, but I still think this. I always felt the IC belt in the mid-'80s was the Boston belt. That was like, we got that each time. I mean, sometimes we got Hogan, 2-3 times a year maybe, but you always got the IC belt. It was always either Randy, and the times that Hogan did come in, it was against Randy. And Randy ended up being, almost getting as many cheers as Hogan, because Randy was that over in Boston, and so was Tito. So yeah, this was fantastic. It came out of nowhere. I don't even think they have all the footage. They just have the ending, and yeah, it just came out of absolutely nowhere. But it was great.
They have a little bit of the footage. They say that the ending didn't get recorded or something went wrong. Like I just remember it being a really, really bad match, and I don't know why, but it was. And I think they just showed a little bit of it, and I don't remember if the finish got messed up or what. But they're like, okay, here's 2 minutes of highlights. This is all you need to see from this match.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's what this is. This is like an ECW number. When Paul had a series of bad matches, what he would do is he'd quick cut them all, so you wouldn't have to put up with them. You'd have like 30 seconds good in an Axl Rotten match that was 20 minutes. So you'll get the 30 seconds. I think that's probably what's happening. I am thinking back on this match. I'm going to admit it right now with rose-colored glasses, because I was 9 years old and I loved Tito. There was something about him. There was he was one of those guys I really believed, because you were starting to get more of a clownish element at this point.
Oh yeah.
Into the Federation, and Tito wasn't like that. So I think I was gravitating toward Tito. Tito was more of an NWA kind of guy, and the IC belt turned into kind of like the NWA style belt, which is why I loved it in Boston. Again, I'm probably over exaggerating the thing, but we always had the IC belt in. And I loved it. I was fine with that. I was fine having Tito against Savage, which I'd seen a million times on Nesson and a couple times live. I love that match. Those two are not capable of a bad match. Those two, right to the end. You could have sent them out there in the 90s. They would have had a good match.
We talked about like Morocco, saw the direction that things were going for him. I mean, I think on this night, now mind you, Vince, the national expansion had just started. Okay, I mean we're not talking even months, we're talking weeks, and it was pretty obvious. It should have been pretty obvious that nothing was going to be the same again. And Morocco had been back in the WWF since late 1982. We're talking like December 82, and here we are, February 84, and he's got to be thinking he's on his way out of the territory. And he's also got to be thinking, well, I'm going home to Hawaii and I'm hanging out for a while, and we'll see what happens after that. And it all worked out, I think, really well for him, because he kind of, disappeared for a while meaning just a few months, came back repackaged as being managed by Mr. Fuji. And then in early 1985, he had a run against Hogan, not, in the expanded areas. They're not going to bring that match to San Antonio, but Boston got a series. I know Madison Square Garden had a series. I don't think Philadelphia got one, but Morocco had another run on top against a guy who was going to sell every seat in that building.
This is all in retrospect.
Yes.
At this time, I would say no more than a year earlier than this, Don was the man. Don had to be sitting there looking at the situation, looking at the rest of the roster. This is pre-Hogan, and saying, I don't know what he had heard, but could I be being positioned to be like the next kind of superstar Graham, the great heel champion? Because Bob's got to go at some point.
That's
you're in
a good
82.
point.
I mean, he's got to be sitting there thinking, who else is there? It's me. And then all of a sudden, here comes Hogan. And you see that go right out the window. So not only is he kind of just the usual kind of, I can sense almost a little, screw this.
Yeah. I mean, I have mentioned on the show before, when Morocco came back, December 82, I was convinced that he was winning the title from Bob Backlund, and he was having that run. And by the time Backlund actually lost the title, I had no idea who he was going to lose it to. I automatically assumed we were going to have a superstar Billy Graham, about a year's run with a heel as champion. So now the babyfaces can have their day in the sun. And I'm like, okay, Valentine's already had his 2 chances. He's probably eliminated. Morocco, now this is his second chance has come and gone. He's probably eliminated. Ken Patera has been gone so long that he's been forgotten about by a lot of the newer fans, just aren't familiar with him. So little did I know that there was not going to be a superstar Billy Graham type run with the title for a heel. It was going straight to Hogan. But anyway, February 10th, this week, It would have been Chris Adams' 65th birthday. Unfortunately, Chris passed about 20 years ago. Sean, give us some thoughts about Chris Adams.
I'll be honest with you, I don't have a ton. I mean, I think that Chris was about as good as he was going to be. I almost don't want to even talk about what happened outside the ring because it's a lot of it's conjecture, some of it's not, and most of it isn't good. But in the ring, he usually was a guy who would meet up with what he had. If you had him in there with good people, he was pretty good. I was watching a match recently with him with Jimmy Garvin. And he was great with Garvin. He was good with the Von Erichs when he was with Gino. But if you put him in a thing where he had to carry it, he really wasn't capable of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, it had more than 15 years ago, I read Steve Austin's book, and Jim Ross did some writing in it. And he was talking about how Steve Austin was trained by Chris Adams, and Jim Ross just was not very kind to Chris Adams in this book at all. I think he referred to him as this ultimate grifter kind of guy. And I also remember Chris doing a commercial for his wrestling school, and he's like, it costs $4,000 to join my wrestling school. Now that might sound like a lot of money, but I make more than $4,000 a week now. And I didn't even know where to start. Oh my God, $4,000 was so overpriced for a wrestling school in like 89, 90, 91. And I knew Chris Adams maybe in his best week, or maybe during the prime of his career, like 85 in world class, he was making around $4,000 a week. I kind of even doubt it was that much, but those days were long gone for him by then.
How many wrestlers from that generation started a school that ended up legitimate? I'm sure there were some.
I mean, so many guys started a school and they just didn't work out in the long run. I'll give Chris Adams credit for that. His school was around for a long time. That's
true. And, I'm not counting Harley here. Harley's somewhat of a legendary guy who's had that, his operation forever. So, and I'm sure there was some that I'm forgetting, but you just hear so many stories about kind of training issues from this era. I mean, not just like the old stories where they're like, get out of here, or they, rough the guy up. I can almost understand that over just almost fraudulent activity at this point.
Yeah, and you know what? I am way more of a Chris Adams fan than I've been sounding like for the past 5 minutes. I mean, he was so good in world class in 84 and 85 when he turned heel. And that was really like the peak of his career. He wound up going to Bill Watts after, and he got drunk on an airplane and managed to headbutt a co-pilot. I'm not sure if he knocked the guy out or what the story was, but you don't do that. And Chris went away for a few months as a result of that conduct. Supposedly, and again, this is something I heard a million years ago. I don't know if it's true. Chris's big beef with World Class, the reason why he left, and he was still a world heavyweight champion, was because Chris wanted Fritz to use his influence, Fritz von Erich, to use his influence to get Chris out of that situation. And Fritz kind of flat out told him, no, I'm not doing that. I need to save that for the next time Kerry or Kevin or get into trouble.
It's just he really has no business to say anything about that. They used him perfectly. My only complaint about how they used him is that he should never be a face. The only reason that worked was the brilliance of Sunshine, basically.
I thought he came across well.
Because of her.
No, not really. He was fine before he got Sunshine in that angle with Jimmy Garvin. He was a good number 4 babyface behind the 3 Von Erich kids. The thing with Chris was that once, I've said this on the show before, it was like once he turned heel, and by the way, I saw him as a babyface in Portland, and I saw a little bit of him as a babyface in Los Angeles. He was fine. But it was almost like once he started being a heel, he couldn't stop. And as a babyface, he came across as a heel in his promos.
He's a natural heel. He just has that kind of thing. He's like Lex Luger that way. He just has a just natural kind of arrogance to him that just doesn't go away as a babyface. So to use him as a face is, I don't know. It worked in this case, but that was more a credit to Jimmy Garvin and to Sunshine than him. I almost thought it was a feud between Jimmy and Sunshine, and he just happened to be there.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. I mean, the girls were obviously the big part of the feud, and it was Jimmy Garvin who really had the issue with Sunshine leaving him, and Chris was just kind of on the side. I always wondered, like in 88, 89, I would see Chris in Texas He went back to World Class after, he went to the UWF, and that got sold to Jim Crockett Promotions. And you know what happened to everyone but Sting in that transaction as far as the wrestlers go. But I always wondered, like in 88 and 89, like why wasn't the NWA, especially 88, why weren't they bringing him in? I mean, he was a fresh new face for a promotion that needed those. And yeah, I know the Chris Adams stories like everyone else.
You just answered your question right there.
No,
I think that's exactly.
not really, though.
The same reason Buddy Landell wasn't getting work anywhere, and the same reason because you just don't need it in this day and age. It's one thing when you have a little territory and you know the local cops, but if you're starting to run a national program, you don't got time for anything like this. And not only that, but just to go back to one thing you mentioned that I didn't have a chance to comment on, that you're the number 4 babyface. Who did he take over the spot from?
Oh, I mean, there was no one in that spot. I mean,
there was. There certainly was someone in that spot.
Oh, Guerrero?
Brian Adidas.
I never saw him that high, especially.
I did before Chris got there. He was. He was always like the buddy
83?
that got thrown in there. Yeah, they were trying to give him the rub off of the Von Erichs for a while. Well, maybe 83 is the far, but I'd say 82 coming up in the early days before Chris got there.
Well, that's the thing. It was just wasn't the same promotion after the Freebirds came in. But I mean, addressing an earlier point that you made, there were Chris Adams stories, so we would have fit right in the locker room. It's the wrestling business. You had guys like that in the 80s.
Yeah, but there weren't a lot of. Yeah, I guess. But I think it's the magnitude of the thing. It's one thing to be like a Dick Murdoch kind of guy who's just a pain in the butt every day, or just having these potentially monumental big things that could involve the feds, like anything over a plane would.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like Batman. He's paid his debt to society, and here's how this conversation would have gone with me and you in 1988. I would have said, hey, they should bring in Chris Adams. And you're like, oh, but there's Chris Adams stories. And I would say, yeah, but they have Chris Champion on the roster. I win.
That's your defense?
Yes,
I'll say that wasn't a good idea. They did nothing with him anyway. He's not. He's just, again. There's a line of just your normal troublemaker, pain in the ass behavior to criminal. And Chris Adams tends to be. Most guys are smart enough to kind of stay on this side of the line. They'll do dumb stuff, but again, on this side of the line, Chris is one of those guys who goes over that line, and that's the scary part. That's why Snooker disappeared so fast.
Listen, I need to whisper this to the audience. Obviously, Sean has not heard the Chris Champion stories.
Oh, I don't think he should be there either. I agree with you. I'm saying you're just having me throw the two of them out.
All right, I could see that, but I mean, I'm just saying, this is how much they're worried. I mean, I don't know what happened. I mean, I don't know if Chris just, pissed the wrong guy off, which I know he was kind of capable of doing, but I actually thought he was conspicuous by his absence in the late 80s / early 90s, especially in 89 when they were rebuilding the whole promotion. I always thought, as far as his talent level goes, he was a guy they could have used. And I mean, again, in 89, they were talking to the Dynamite Kid, talking about bringing him in. Oh, one last Chris Adams thing, by the way, which reminds me, there was a rumor going around in 87 when Dynamite blew out his back and they weren't sure like what was going to happen. There was a rumor that Chris Adams was going to replace him in the British Bulldogs.
Oh, but that's exactly what they need, is to add him to the mix between those two. There's the good ship lollipop right there.
Again, it was the wrestling business. If you can bring in a guy,
it's
like
the
Shawn
wrestling
Michaels
business,
and Marty Jannetty, you can bring in Chris Adams.
Yes, it's the wrestling business at the time, and they're bad for the time.
But I'm saying everyone else got the free pass that Chris Adams did. Maybe not literally everyone else.
Any wrestler from that era who does not have a Tom Billington horror story?
Yeah, and they were willing to bring in Tom Billington, and Billington, was, according to Billington, he was on the phone with Flair, and Flair told him, "Hey, you need to tone down your act." And Billington said, "You know what, Rick? Let's just forget about it." I don't know. All right, one last thing. February 9th, 1983. An NWA world title change occurs as Ric Flair is pinned clean in the middle by the mysterious Midnight Rider. I thought I still think in a weird way, this was a really cool angle. The first incarnation of the Midnight Rider, not the 88 incarnation, but the
Yes.
82,
An
83.
important distinction.
Yeah.
The 88 was brought out for the sake of bringing it out. This was brought out for a very specific reason. If you want to compare it to anything, Uvalde Slim back in, I think it was in Georgia, back in like whenever is kind of closer to what you were doing here. But the basic deal was this was part of the Sullivan feud, I believe. And he lost a loser leave town match to Sullivan. And he had come back under the mask to get his revenge. And this ended up with Sullivan losing the match and becoming Lucifer, a similar kind of thing. But the deal came up that he had the match against Flair. And if he beats, if you can't have, I think this is where the whole deal started, where you can't have a masked guy as the champion.
Well, no, it wasn't that. And let me take
at least publicly.
Back. Yeah, let me take a step back. Dusty lost a loser leave town match to Kevin Sullivan when, Sullivan cheated quite badly. He used an atomizer to stick down in Dusty Rhodes' mouth and knock him out. So Dusty has been barred from Florida for, he's been cheated out of being able to wrestle in Florida for 90 days. So he comes back, and I think this was the first time a babyface had ever done this on a major scale. Comes back as a babyface as the Midnight Rider. He's got a big old bodysuit and a mask, and it's obvious that it's Dusty, but it's not over the top obvious like, say, Jimmy Valiant as Charlie Brown.
It's pretty over there. You see the blotch. What are you talking about?
No, he had a full bodysuit on.
Oh, okay, yeah, but still, he has somewhat of a distinctive body, especially for people who've seen him for 10 years.
And he spoke a specific way, and there was blonde hair, curly blonde hair poking out of the mask.
It was every bit the Jimmy Valiant deal.
It was Sullivan getting what he deserved, and
yeah, it was part of the joke. And then we'd have the great bits where Gordon would be like, "Well, I don't know."
Yeah, and they announced that if that Sullivan could prove that that's Dusty Rhodes, well, Dusty's out for an entire year, banned from the entire NWA, not just Florida, which is kind of dumb because he could always come back as Midnight Rider too. But Midnight Rider gets a match against Ric Flair, and he beats Ric Flair clean in the middle. He's the new NWA champion. Well, Bob Geigel is in attendance, and a masked wrestler certainly can hold the title. But Bob needs to verify, just for the NWA's own records, who their champion is. So Dusty is caught in a really bad spot. He can't show Bob Geigel, hey, I'm Dusty Rhodes, I'm suspended, but I'm doing this, because he's out for a year. So he has to hand over the NWA title to Bob Geigel. At the time, I thought it was brilliant. And every promotion did something like this. By the way, I think I was wrong. I think Stagger Lee had become Junkyard Dog had become Stagger Lee in like November 1982, but Dusty
did this before. No, Dusty did this before.
As Uvalde Slim.
Yeah, 1980.
But if I understand correctly, Uvalde Slim wasn't Dusty's being suspended. It was Dusty's alter ego. It was this guy he could put the mask on, and he didn't have to be like, an upstanding citizen Dusty Rhodes. He could be Uvalde Slim, and
right,
he
but it
could
was
just
still
randomly beat the crap out of people.
Right, but it was still it didn't involve a suspension, right? But it kind of the same concept where you obviously knew who the guy was, and that part. But yeah, the suspension was different. So yeah.
No, right, but Uvalde Slim was an alter ego. Midnight Rider was Dusty hiding under a mask. And by the way, and I have to throw this in, they didn't just throw it out there in 1988. This was Dusty's big angle that was going to turn the company around, or at least he thought.
Yeah, but it wasn't set up as anywhere near as well as this was.
Oh, no. Because
that's what I mean by throwing it out.
Yeah, but it was, it was their big angle. And by the way, Dusty, as the Midnight Rider in 1988, they were going to do the same thing at the Great American Bash. There was a reason why Dusty Rhodes was suspended for 120 days this time instead of 90, because they were going to completely redo that angle. And they spent a lot of television time on that angle. And they wasted it all. They dropped it after like 6 weeks. But anyway, we have used up your 60 minutes once again. I want to thank Sean Goodwin for being the convivial co-host that he is. I want to thank everyone for listening, and please tune in next week. Luke Hippelman, our producer, thanks for all you do. And this has been a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. Go Vols.